Welcome to Fundraising Stories with Female Founders. I'm Julia Elliott-Brown, the founder and CEO of Enter the Arena. I'm a serial entrepreneur and an expert in raising investment and business growth. Our mission at Enter the Arena is to empower female founders to fly through pre-raise and investment and onto the exponential growth of their business with investment expertise and business coaching. Here we share the stories of inspirational female founders who've raised investment to inspire you to do the same. You'll hear their honest accounts of what it was really like to secure funding, the highs, the lows, and the challenges they experienced on the journey. And along the way, we'll discuss top tips for how you can be successful too. Today I'm super excited to be talking with Emily Bendell from London lingerie brand Bluebella. Now, Bluebella's lingerie is exciting, provocative and unique, appealing to a modern woman who's both strong and feminine. A woman who buys lingerie to please herself at an affordable price point. And I have to admit, I am a fan. Now, after graduating at Oxford University with a degree in politics, philosophy and economics, Emily started Bluebella back in 2005 as a home party plan business and also licensing and designing and creating products for the infamous brand 50 Shades of Grey. But the business has come a very long way from those early days, pivoting into the burgeoning e-commerce market and wholesale of their own brand lingerie, as well as nightwear and swimwear, and now shipping to more than 25 countries worldwide, including the US, which is absolutely amazing. Emily is a superstar. She was listed in Management Today's 35 Under 35 in 2015 and continues to lead the Bluebella business, as well as being its creative director. And when it comes to fundraising, Emily has raised a total of 2.15 million in investment for Bluebella from angel investors, government match funding and through crowdfunding. So it's been quite a journey. So let's find out more. Emily, a very warm welcome.
Hi, very happy to be here.
Great to have you. So I really want to know kind of how on earth you went from studying politics, philosophy and economics at Oxford University and started a lingerie brand.
Yeah, it's not the typical route. I should either be a lawyer, a management consultant or attempting to run the country. So I'm quite glad I'm not doing the last one of those things at the moment. I mean, it's sort of, for me, I saw a gap in the market for my idea. So I've always loved lingerie. And I just couldn't find what myself and my friends wanted. And that's how the idea for Bluebella spawned. I was working as a journalist after university, and I just kept coming back to this idea I had, Bluebella. I think in hindsight, looking back, it was maybe inevitable I was going to start a business because, you know, my parents had their own business. It was quite normal for me. And at school I had lots of different rackets, you know, on the go at any one time. So sort of with hindsight, maybe it was inevitable, but I certainly wasn't thinking that after university. I was working in journalism, kind of figuring out what to do. But I thought there was this gap and I thought someone should do it and I thought I would give it a go, and that's really how it started.
Fantastic. So entrepreneurialism is in your blood quite clearly.
Maybe.
So what was your kind of original idea for the business? What was the concept that you had in your head?
So for me, you know, back then, the market was more limited than it is now. But for me, lingerie was always, it wasn't this kind of binary purchase of either sort of sexy or functional, which is what seemed to be the offering. It was that here's a sort of sexy pieces, you know, sexy that you dress up in for someone else. And here is your sort of functional, everyday, comfortable product. And actually for me, it felt very dated, that offering. You know, for me, lingerie, first of all, was a fashion purchase. You know, that it should reflect your style, your personality in the same way your jewelry or your shoes or your handbag might. And also this whole kind of dressing up idea really sort of didn't sit well with me. I thought that, you know, a lot of the imagery around lingerie was very submissive. It was very much this sort of coquettish, playful, you know, dress up idea. And actually that was troubling to me because I thought, you know, if as women, the product we wear most intimately, closest to our skin, if that's not for us, if it's for someone else, that didn't sort of sit right with me. So I wanted a brand that was fashion focused, that was very contemporary, but that also had this strength at the heart of it. And I didn't really find that, and definitely not at a price point that I could afford in my early 20s. And so that was really the concept. Yeah, started very small, and it's built over the years.
So how did you get the whole thing off the ground? And obviously, importantly for this podcast, how did you fund things in those early days?
Well, the very early days, I mean, I did this kind of what's sort of known as this kind of Pret-a-Manger road test idea, which was I wanted to kind of be sure that what I thought was true in terms of the demand and the market being out there. So I basically decided to spend a year testing it. So I, at that point, you know, there was no way I could have gone into any of our own production. I wanted to do it on a shoestring and not spend too much money. So I went out and I found various sort of small boutique brands that were not available on the high street. And so it wasn't quite, you know, obviously it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, but it was, you know, a way of having a collection and offering. And I went out and I sold. I did local events, I sold to friends, to family, and it was really testing the concept, understanding what people wanted, understanding sort of what was missing, sizing, how to fit, colours, you know, really sort of understanding the market. And so to do that, you know, I initially worked around my other job for quite a while. And then eventually I moved back in with my dad, which I don't recommend in your mid-20s.
Not usually in my fundraising strategy approach, you know. Yeah,
yeah, to save some, but it saved, you know, bless him, it was kind of him, because it, you know, it meant I didn't have, you know, my rent going out, and I was able to do that because obviously you don't earn very much in those early days. And really I did that for a year, and after a year I thought, you know, there's something in this that, you know, I think it's worth me really sort of throwing myself into it. And, you know, I think looking back, you know, I was 24, I didn't have at that point children, I didn't have a mortgage, I was able to do that in a way that would have been more challenging for me, you know, at this stage of my life. And that's actually why I always say, particularly to young women, but young people generally, you know, if you've got the idea, just have a go. You know, if it doesn't work, it's easier to sort of figure that out and do that in a way the earlier in your life than it is later. So
yeah,
I'm glad
less to risk at that point, isn't it?
I think, yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, tough though. Still tough not having any money and moving back in with your dad.
Yeah, well, yeah, great.
So how long was it then before you thought, hang on a minute, I need some proper money here to make this really work?
So what happened was we started to grow, and at that point, you know, I was sort of doing this kind of local based selling approach, and I'd started sort of developing our own styles and putting it up into production. It was sort of a gradual process. And I started recruiting other girls, people who attended the events I was doing, who wanted to do the same thing. And sort of quite organically, I started to grow this sales force. And like any particularly sort of retail business, and particularly fashion retail, and particularly lingerie, because there's so many sizes, you know, you start needing cash to invest in stock. And you also start sort of hitting your head on operationally, because you start needing, you know, as it grows, you know, in the very early days, it was literally just me. So I would kind of answer the phone and put on a different voice depending on who it was, like sales and deliveries like this. And it became quite clear I needed some office space, I needed stock, I needed, you know. And so initially that was self-funded. I had inherited a bit of money from my mum, unfortunately, who passed away, and was able to invest that. But after, you know, a little while, a couple of years in, I realised I needed to raise some external investment. And that was our first round, which we'll think about, from memory, I think about 300k we were raising. And that was tough, because I went out to these sort of established angel communities, you know, so it's the whole kind of Dragon's Den sort of pitching situation. And what I found was that even though we were selling, we were growing, we had this sort of track record, that community is 95% at that time at least male, and business angels often will invest in industries that they know, which is absolutely fair enough, where their expertise is. But as a sort of female focused business, it was not something typically that sort of these angels had any experience of or knowledge of or understood, you know, why is my brand different to another brand and so on. So that was quite challenging. So I was getting a lot of rejections. I wasn't getting, you know, the interest I thought I would get, and that was quite disheartening.
Did you have any sort of techniques for getting around that issue?
So in the end, what happened is I sort of realised the issue. I realised that, you know, I wasn't meeting the people who got it. and I would have to be proactive to find those people myself. So the first thing I did was decide to put on my own event for high net worth women. And I did it totally, these were not people I was connected to in any way. I literally cold called, emailed people, cold called people, said, look, I'm putting on this event, come and have a drink, come and see the business opportunity. I was living in Nottingham at the time, but I did it in central London. And enough people came, and it was through that I was introduced to an all-female angel network called Adidi, who had recently been formed. And we were actually their very first investment. And that was part of that round. The other part of that round was a trade investor. So again, looking at, okay, well, who's in the industry that would understand what I'm doing? Who's running those companies? Would they listen to me? And they did. So really, that first round was pretty much entirely made up of people that I had sort of gone out and found, rather than those that were sitting in kind of existing forums waiting for investments to come their way.
Wow, so you really hustled your way through that. I'm so impressed that you did the cold calling. I mean, that's something else. So, in fact, I remember it was when I saw you pitch at Adidi, it was the first time I came across you, actually. I remember being very impressed by your presentation at the time.
Oh, thank you.
It was great. But yeah, it's such a unique thing to be able to pitch to a room full of women, and not many groups like that, and not a huge amount of funds either that are focused just at women. And yeah, it's quite challenging. Although having said that, I mean, guys do like lingerie, right? And guys do buy lingerie.
I mean, yes, but I think, there's one thing liking the product, and there's the second thing sort of understanding the business opportunity. And I think the problem I was finding, and this is not to sort of tar all men with the sun brush, because obviously I've got some amazing male investors who have been incredibly supportive and fabulous. So not to kind of make generalizations, but I think what the issue is it's understanding, because at the end of the day, I am making bras and knickers, other people are making bras and knickers. You have to understand why the brand is different and why that, will be successful in order to buy into what I'm doing. And that's probably less the case now, because we've got this track history of sales and we've got these internationally renowned retailers that back us. And so even if you don't know, if you can't make that judgment on your own, there's plenty of evidence already there to give you confidence. But in the early days, before we were selling into wholesale at all, when the numbers were still relatively small, you're having to make a judgment yourself about the brand proposition. And I think that was the issue at that stage, that the men I was seeing weren't able to do that, whereas the women were.
Yeah, I think that's a very common problem for a lot of female founders who are building businesses in fashion, in beauty, even in food and drink, very competitive, very, very fragmented markets. Where there's a sort of leap of faith, isn't there, that you've almost got this kind of insight ahead of the curve. You can see this gap.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's really hard to evidence that gap, isn't it? It's really hard to kind of explain to people why this is really important, because it's kind of in your psyche. There's not like there's huge amounts of data to back it up either. Well,
that's right. And it's very subtle, because, some people might look at our imagery and say, well, that is provocative. It's a girl in her lingerie. She looks, and I was saying, well, we would never photograph a girl lying on a bed, for example. It's submissive. It's like, who are you waiting for? Our girls always have attitude, and, the way we style them. And, so there's a subtlety, I think, to the brand proposition, which isn't always, depending who's looking at it, wouldn't always understand it.
We need more women angel investors, don't we, to come and help at the early stage.
Well, we absolutely do. And it's, there is an issue, because, women, it is not proportional to the wealth controlled by women, the amount of women investing, and it is an issue. And so, yeah, absolutely, I totally agree.
And you had some match funding, is that right?
That's right. Sorry, yeah, I should have said as well. So even in that early stage, we had some match funding. We were based in Nottingham at the time, and there was some regional match funding for the East Midlands, and they also invested. Yeah.
So in terms of match funding, I mean, some match funders only come and match fund against recognised institutional investors. Were there particular criteria that they put in place in terms of who the original funding had come from that they were going to match?
No, it could be private individuals. I mean, they take their own view on the investment, their own view on the evaluation, and they have quite a strict due diligence process. But actually, what I found was that gave the angel investors confidence, because they knew there was a sort of a government-backed fund going through that process. There's not going to be any skeletons in the closet. So, in a sense, that gave kind of credibility and comfort to those coming in alongside. But it could be private individuals. That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think the match funding opportunities are really exciting for people to explore. There are quite a few of them, aren't there? The regional ones, and then the London Co-Investment Fund, and some of the larger ones too. I mean, it's certainly what I found when I was fundraising. We were match funded at the time with my last business, which was a fashion tech company, by the British Business Bank.
Yes, yeah.
No longer does that, unfortunately, but it's great, isn't it? Because you can kind of get halfway there with your fundraise.
Yeah, and then
match fund. So I think it's always worth people exploring that as an option.
Sure.
Okay, interesting. So your early rounds, kind of your first sort of 300 and then another 300 were done through angel investors. And then what happened after that then? So you had a couple of years of trading?
So we've been going, I've struggled to remember the dates now, but what happened was, so we were growing as essentially a direct selling company. So, at the time I liked direct selling because it was this very kind of personal service. You're in a lady's home, she could have a glass of wine with her friends, look at the product and so on. And I thought that direct selling was only going to grow in the UK, in the sense that there was, at the time, only 500,000 direct sellers in the UK. And per capita, as compared to the US, there should have been 5 times that, 2.5 million. So, pension black hole, people need extra money, flexible working. I thought, right, this is going to be the way it grows. But actually, what happened is the growth of e-commerce, and suddenly you could buy from the comfort of your own home without having to put nibbles out. and so direct selling as a channel became more challenging. The other part of it was, I was finding that actually the brand was very difficult. It was very difficult to control the brand through a direct selling model as well, because although you might recruit X number of people yourself, at our peak we had 500 direct sellers across the country, and you've obviously not met them all. They've been trained by people you've trained, and it actually becomes quite difficult to control the brand. And I felt that was another sort of serious concern. And so sort of the two things came together, that I realized actually we need to move out of direct selling, and we need to transition to e-commerce and wholesale model. We were already doing a bit of wholesale, but in a small way. And then at that time, and so I needed sort of, basically we'd plateaued in terms of sales. I needed to raise money in order to start building the foundations for that. So that was, that was a challenging round, because actually you're selling a new story. People are invested on one story, and the story's changed, and the figures have slowed. So that was probably the most sort of challenging time, that transition.
Yeah, I mean, raising on a pivot, it is hard, but it's one of the points in your business journey that you do need to raise. I mean, so you say it was challenging. How did you overcome that challenge with those new investors that you brought in?
I mean, I think it's just, it's the same thing like at any point. I think that, in some ways we'd proven that we could grow, that there was a demand for the product. And so it was really sort of helping people understand that the sales channel is what was limiting us, and that the brand was becoming diluted because of the sales channel, but the core of the brand was powerful. And obviously, you didn't need to convince anyone that e-commerce was the way to go. That was fairly, but convincing people that we knew how to do it, it was a learning curve, learning how to do it. So yeah, it's the same thing as credible team. We had to make quite a few changes to the team, because the team was obviously built around a single channel business, and we were changing that. And it's sort of, yeah. And so during that time as well, we had this opportunity around the 50 Shades, which you mentioned earlier, license. And so, there was a sort of a few, sort of 2 to 3 years really of sort of closing one business. In the end, we actually sold the direct selling business to a French company that were entering the UK. So there was sort of transitioning that business out, selling it, but also supporting the new company, building the platform for the new business in terms of all the infrastructure we needed as a sort of web and wholesale business, whilst at the same time doing this huge licensing deal for 50 Shades of Grey, which was this sort of global sensation. So, I mean, those sort of 2 years are, that's still a bit of a blur, to be honest.
Oh my God, how did you do it all?
I'd say. I know it got particularly crazy when I remember being on holiday with my then boyfriend, and I would sort of be so much was going on. I would sort of, I'm just going to get some drinks, and I'd be like there on my email, sort of absolutely sort of crazy because there was so much happening. So yeah, it was definitely a crazy time. Yeah.
Oh my God. And so were you doing your fundraise at that time as well, when it was all
So we must have done the raise, yeah, I guess just before. Again, timelines blur a little bit, but I guess just before we then kicked off the 50 Shades deal. And then the final raise that we've done, the crowd that you mentioned, that was sort of the most enjoyable one, really, because that's when we're sort of, it was, we're growing, it's going well, and we just want to sort of expand international, and and it was sort of lovely upward facing graphs and so on, so that made life easier.
Did you actually just say that it was an enjoyable fundraise?
I don't know, but it's all relative. I think maybe that's the thing, it's all relative, but it was definitely it's definitely the one that was probably the least challenging. Yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit. So it was a crowdfunding round. You raised 1.25 million.
Yes.
A 4.7 million pound pre-money valuation, which is amazing, shows great progress over the last 5 years. And you had over 650 investors that came in on that round. That is a lot of investors.
It's a lot, yeah. I mean, the crowdfunding thing. So the way that went, we knew we needed to do sort of 1 million plus round. We were looking at kind of the different options. And obviously we could have gone down the VC route, or a small PE house, whatever. But the crowdfunding thing really appealed to me. I've been in a meeting a few months prior. It was being held at this restaurant, and one of the guys I was with was like, "Oh, look, they've got my beer here." And I sort of looked at him, and he's like, "They've got my beer. Look!" And he started telling me the brand story of this beer behind the bar. And he had basically crowd invested in this beer company, probably a relatively small amount. And I just thought, that is so powerful that he is a brand ambassador for this, this beer company. And I really liked that idea. I like the idea that you have this sort of little army of brand ambassadors that are your investors. And so, as a consumer facing brand as well, we felt that it would be a good thing to do. I think as long as there are definitely pitfalls with crowdfunding, so you have to I think you have to approach it in a certain way. And because we had some very experienced investors alongside the crowd, within the crowd, we were obviously running things according to their process, so everything's very carefully documented and correct, and and so on. But the experience so far has been good. We run comms to our crowd, when a new collection launches, or we want to tell them about something, or we're running an event and so on, and they're very responsive. You obviously need to build in a common strategy ongoing, and you need to do updates, and you need to manage it, so it does add that extra element. But you've also got this sort of generally so far very enthusiastic sort of base that you can use as a marketing channel in different ways.
Yeah, it's amazing. And 650 brand ambassadors, that's not bad, eh?
Yeah, exactly.
Tell us a bit, if you remember, or you have the stats actually, about how that round was structured. So if you got 1.25 million, do you remember how much of that you'd secured in advance of going live with your crowdfund? And also be quite useful to know how much of it came from kind of major investors.
Yeah.
How many of the smaller ones, whether they were coming from your customer base or from the platform?
Yeah, so most, I don't know if sort of this sort of public knowledge or not, but I think you do need some investment already set up, agreed, to sort of to feed through the crowd, because it gives momentum to the raise. It kind of gets it. So there's a little bit of smoke and mirrors about crowdfunding, which people should be aware of. You don't just put a video up on a website and people start giving you money. There's a lot of planning that goes into the campaign. And so we had secured, I think, maybe 30% of the raise already, either from existing investors, or we had some new ones coming in that we'd met through different channels.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a minimum, really. I mean, I think these days, the platforms are usually advising maybe even 50%. I know many who've gone in with 100% of the target,
and then you go over, right? Yeah. So, and that's the smoke and mirrors bit, which is a little bit misleading, I guess.
Yeah. I don't know if it's misleading. I think it's just about creating momentum. That's what it's
Yeah.
about, rather than being misleading. It's about making sure that you've got enough people who are in before you go live, because otherwise I mean, it's like that kind of empty restaurant syndrome. I mean, if you walk past a restaurant and there's nobody in it, you don't want to go in.
Yeah, I think that's true. I suppose when I say misleading, I mean for a company, you know, I've had people contact me for advice about it, and I think they don't realise that, so they think they can just sort of produce the assets and raise. So yeah, as long as the crowdfunders companies are being clear on that. In terms of, sorry, your second question was,
so you had about 30% in advance from existing investors and
and you asked about customers. Yeah, so that was a funny one for us actually. So obviously the crowdfunding companies are quite keen that you promote the raise to your customers, and that's partly obviously to help you, but it's also because, you know, they want your database in their crowd, you know. So just to be a little bit cynical about it,
you're right. I mean, that, you know, we have to see what everybody's interests are, and that is definitely part of the mix. Exactly.
And so and for us it was a funny one, because most of our customers are female and they are young, and I was sort of, well, you know, how much spare cash does that, you know, would our disposable income, would our sort of customer have to invest in this way, when actually, you know, my communication with my customers is only so much real estate for that. And if I'm sending them something about crowdfunding, I can't send them something about a latest product. And that was a bit of a tension, actually, working out what was sensible, what wasn't. So obviously we let our customers know about it, because, you know, we would have loved customers to be investors, and I think more women should be investors, so there's a responsibility ethically for that as well. But we probably didn't push it as much as other companies did, because we just weren't seeing the results from it. And actually, you know, the crowd is still predominantly male and so on. So I think that's why often you see, you know, cycling companies or beer companies or whatever, you get a lot of those on crowdfunding, because a lot of the customers, but also, you know, other female fashion brands, but perhaps with a sort of higher average price point, so their customers got a bit more disposable income perhaps to invest. So I think it was a minority of our customers that actually became investors, but I think a lot of the investors have become customers, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. I think, you know, you're right. You've got to look at your customer base and think, are they going to invest? But you can sometimes think broadly about it. You know, but I've personal experience and also working with other brands where it might be that your customer base is female, but funnily enough and annoyingly enough, you know, it's their husbands that will come in and do the investment. But sometimes it's that network effect, isn't it? It's not just the direct people that you have in your database, your customers, but who they might tell. So, but yeah, that's interesting that you got so many investors that came in, but that weren't part of your current.
But we ran the whole thing, you know, like a proper structured marketing campaign. You know, we were doing Facebook ads, we were doing ads on LinkedIn, we were looking at, so we, you know, we were running it, you know, and I actually brought in a project manager for the raise, because I knew that I wouldn't be able to do, you know, all the comms, and, you know, so we actually, and her background was kind of financial PR, and she was good at all. So I think we took it very seriously, and we prepped for it, and we really drove it, and I think that's part of why it was so successful.
Yeah, well, you have to run it like a military operation. I think with you, I mean, your business was at a certain point of traction when you were doing that round, so fortunately you had good resource in house. I mean, a lot of entrepreneurs are a bit earlier on when they do a crowdfunding raise. I don't think people realise actually what's involved to get it to be successful.
But then my advice then would be, you know, you gather your team, even if your team is 2 people, but gather them and say, look, I'm gonna the next sort of 45 days, I'm really not going to be very available because I'm doing this. Can you support in extra ways? You know, but I think it is, you know, whatever stage you're at, you do need to prepare for that.
You've got to get the right resource on it. It's really, really important, because the last thing you want to do on a crowdfunding campaign is fail.
No, it's very public.
Very, very public thing. And I think still around sort of 50-55% of crowdfunding campaigns do fail.
Okay.
Which is, I don't think a lot of people realise. It's just it's a part of the structure of crowdfunding, and that's the platforms accept that. But yeah, it's always sad. I see when crowdfunding campaigns are up there and they've only got sort of 10 or 15% funded in advance, and you just think, oh my goodness, it's probably going to struggle. So it sounds like you ran it really well. Yeah,
but it still surpassed our expectations, though. Even so, you know, so we were really thrilled with the result. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I would say, I remember looking at your campaign. I think I came in as a very small investor on it, but
Yeah.
the imagery was very strong, and I imagine that I mean, again, talking about how you can work a female focused product to male investors, your product lends itself to the male investor eye, because the
Are you
photography.
suggesting people put money in because there were ladies in bras? Outrageous. No, I mean, I don't know. I think for, you know, it's hard for me to comment on the provocative thing. I think the thing that I was conscious of was that this is a public facing window, and we are a consumer brand, and I didn't want to put anything out that I didn't think respected the overall brand. So the video had to be beautiful, the imagery had to be beautiful, everything had to sort of sit within as if it was a normal B2C campaign. And I think that is the thing. If you're, you know, if you're a B2B business and you're, you know, then you could probably get away with quite a simple video and and a white background, and it's all about the content and so on. But for us, you know, I didn't want it had to reflect the overall brand, you know, which is more expensive to do because it's high production values, it's, you know, but I didn't want anything that any one of our customers couldn't have seen and, you know, lose any of the kind of magic of the brand and the product. So yeah. But yeah, in terms of the sort of product mix, I think that can work for or against you. You know, I think, yeah, maybe it's eye-catching, but you know, but equally people may not be comfortable with that product if they don't know it for the reasons I described earlier. So yeah, I think that could probably work both ways.
It's a good point you make about how important it is to invest in the assets to make sure that they are commensurate with your brand. I think for any brand, they need to do that, and it can be quite expensive, can't it? If you do have high production values in your video, but then on the other hand, if you're clever, you can reuse those assets for lots of other things.
Oh yeah, and we did that, you know, so we cut the video up in different ways and used it as a wholesale training video, and absolutely, yeah, that's the way to do it.
Yeah, so it's worth, if you're going to do it, I think do it well if you can.
Yeah.
So having done sort of all different sorts of raising finance, I mean, you know, if you were to raise again, and I imagine you might, you can tell me, you know, would you crowdfund again, or do you think you're now sort of more in the VC territory, and what do you feel about that?
I certainly wouldn't rule it out, you know. I think it would depend, yeah, certainly, you know, there's pros and cons to both. In some ways we have so many investors, there's not one, you know, if you have a VC investor and your thoughts or vision becomes misaligned, that's a big issue, whereas I don't have that problem. So, you know, there's pros and cons each way. As I said, my experience so far has been that the crowd has been a very positive experience. So it would depend how much we were raising and so on. But I certainly wouldn't be jumping to a VC. But yeah, I don't know. I think the jury's out on that one currently.
Yeah, I mean, it depends how much you want to raise and how fast you want to and all that kind of thing.
And then the expertise as well, you know, because I think, you know, I think at this stage, if we were looking at any VC money, it might be for, you know, because they also have strategic expertise somewhere that we were looking, you know, something like that. So I think also it depends what you're looking for.
Exactly. And so, and you've got a little one, and you've got another one, a little baby on the way. Is that
on the way? Yes. keeping the camera here.
How have you found all that, and how have you? Because it's a question I'd like to ask in terms of how your investors have dealt with that, because I hope these days that most investors are really progressive around female entrepreneurs and how you manage your personal life around running your business, right? Especially when you've got small ones to look after. Have your investors been supportive? Any issues you've come across?
So I mean, I've had some in the sort of more distant past. You know, I've had investor meetings when I've been raising with angels who have asked about my plans for starting a family. You know, which would just, you know, would be illegal in a job interview and would never be asked of a male entrepreneur. So I've had some, you know, so I think there's plenty that are not enlightened about that.
How did you deal with that, by the way?
Do you know what, actually, that's one I have regrets about how I dealt with that, because I was quite young at the time and it threw me off guard. And, you know, how I would deal with that now, you know, I obviously wouldn't want the investment from somebody that thought that was an appropriate question to ask anyway. But there was also he had some sort of younger female admins in the room, and I sort of brushed it, you know, I didn't deal with it head on. I thought, in hindsight, it was a bad example to those even younger girls that were in the room. But, you know, I didn't want the investment anyway. You know, I think taking investment, I always say to people, it's like a marriage. You know, you have to have the same shared hopes and dreams, be able to work together, all those things. And if you can't, don't do it, because it's just going to end in disaster. So, you know, there's plenty of sort of
this question around, you know, is it appropriate to ask that question or not? Because you're right, in a corporate environment, they wouldn't ask that question. But it's such a tricky one, isn't it? Because you are sort of you're going to be running this business, and they want to know how you're going to manage it. I don't know how that should be handled, because part of me thinks, well, it's good for investors to get to know you personally and know what your personal situation is, and make sure you've got the right support around you so that you can be effective. I don't know.
I mean, I think it is totally inappropriate to ask that question, because I think unless you ask it to, you know, to men as well, you know, like I doubt there's many investors ask about family plans, you know, but that the assumption that a woman, because there are plenty of women who take 2 weeks off and go back full time, and that's their choice, and that's fine. So, and equally, there are plenty of men that might have a child and want to work more flexibly after that point. So, you know, it's this sort of gender split issue which is inappropriate.
Yes, I think if we felt that question was being asked of everybody, we would probably take less umbrance with it, actually. But
yeah, exactly. So, but in sort of, to answer sort of my experience since I've had children, I mean, I've got my board, most of which are investors as well, have been really supportive. I've got an amazing chairman who is wonderful in many ways, but also is incredibly supportive, and sort of makes sure that, you know, he's checking in with me sort of on a personal level, and, you know, how it's managing and what support I need and so on. And so, you know, for me, I genuinely mean this. I think I'm more effective since I had a child, in the sense that I think you become so ruthless with your time. I mean, what happened with me, which is I think a shared experience of a lot of women who have children who have got very sort of full-on jobs, is before you have the child, you look really carefully at everything you're doing, and is it right that you're even doing it? And what I found was, before having my son, I actually empowered my team to do things I probably should have empowered them to do ages ago and hadn't, because obviously I'm a bit of a control freak. And these are things that I have not taken back once I've been back in full swing. And they're things I should have probably passed earlier. So first of all, it's helped me do that, which was the right thing to do. And then I think you become so ruthless with your time that you are much better at making sure you're not spending time on things you shouldn't be doing, because your time becomes so precious. And so actually, I think it can, you know, I think people generally should also see it not just as this thing that's difficult to manage, but it also does help hone your skills. So there's this real positive. I think everyone should pretend they're having a baby and see what they do, you know. I honestly think that, you know, so.
I love it. Instead of people sort of hiding their pregnancy bumps at investor meetings, actually put a pillow underneath your top.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm not immune to it. I mean, after the crowdfund, I think we had those that invested over a certain amount, part of the kind of perks was to have a kind of sort of champagne reception and blah blah blah. And I think I sort of found out I was pregnant, so I was like, we better get this in quick. I don't want to turn up to it with like a, you know, so I'm not sort of immune, because I sort of didn't want to sort of freak them all out. But so we did that quite early on. But you know what, I don't think I've even shared that I've had a child with the wider investment community, because it's not relevant. You know, I didn't take much time out. I was never off email. It's just not relevant to, you know, in the same way, if someone was having a sort of, you know, a knee operation and needed 2 weeks off, and then they wouldn't go and email all their investors, would they? So I think it depends how you approach it. You know, you certainly shouldn't hide it, and it depends how you want to balance it, how relevant it is to share the news, and how widely.
Yeah, amazing. Well, so, and just kind of to wrap up really, so I mean, your business is profitable now, which is an incredible position to be in, and I think a real reflection of all your hard work and ambition and your entrepreneurial flair, and also the fact that you recognise when you needed to fundraise to help you to grow. That's obviously helped you to realise the vision. What do you think is next for the business now?
So I mean, we've had some, you know, since that crowdfund, the last 2 years have been amazing. We've more than, you know, pretty much doubled in growth every year for 2 years, and it looks like we'll do similar again this year. As you say, we're profitable. So, you know, we're still very much focused on growing, you know, carrying on with what we're doing. We still, there's so much more room to grow with our current offering. as you mentioned at the beginning, we're very focused on the US. We now work with a lot of key retailers over there like Nordstrom and Bloomingdale's and Revolve and Shopbop and many more. And our direct B2C business in the US is actually the fastest growing part of the business. And we're looking at sort of various new territories. We launched a French and German site last year. We'll be launching 2 new country sites this year. So certainly sort of international expansion. The other thing is a new category. We launched swim recently, which we're really excited about. So sort of gently moving into some new areas. The year before we launched hosiery. We're also expanding our size range. So yeah, it's just, you know, still all about growth.
Fantastic. Wow, you've got a lot on your plate. Well, I think I really wish now I'd invested significantly more in your
Well, I'll let you know if there's another round.
Please do. Yeah. Anyway, damn. What was I thinking? Well, thank you so much, Emily. It's been amazing to hear your story. I love your lingerie. It's fabulous.
Thank you.
Wish you all the best. Keep in touch, and thank you again for sharing your story.
No, thank you very much.
Thanks for following Fundraising Stories with Female Founders. This content is all provided to you for free, so if you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe so you never miss another one. Enter the Arena has helped hundreds of female founders fly through pre-raise and investment and onto the exponential growth of their business. Our first-hand experience, expert guidance, and proven programs help female founders unleash the Wonder Woman inside. To see if we can help you do the same, head over to www.enterthearena.co.uk. I'm Julia Elliott Brown, and I look forward to talking with you soon.